will introduce our panel on combating transnational criminal organizations. And as our panelists said yesterday, the items that we're talking about, transnational criminal organizations, there's a lot of interconnection with violent extremist organizations. But we collectively think that it's fundamentally important to understand how these organizations operate and what their features are. Our moderator will be Dr. Jeff Jones of International Relations, Military History, and Political Science, and focuses on transnational issues that deal with peace building, governance, conflict management, and security. Dr. Jackson challenges such as post-conflict stabilization, climate change, and violent extremism. He has worked at the Partnership Concepts and Policy Branch in the Cooperation and Regional Security Division, NATO, and as a consultant in the Regional Conflict Department, NATO. The work he carries out focuses on NATO's relationships with African states and organizations and proposes new ways of cooperation in the fields of post-conflict stabilization, asymmetric warfare, and defense capability building, in geography, and a BA in history. Dr. Jackson, thank you sincerely for your attendance. I invite you to present.
Hello and welcome to the third plenary on combating transnational criminal organizations. Really what this panel of distinguished speakers is going to be doing is showing why this topic matters. I wanted their bios to be very brief so that we could get to the presentations and then we could get to the questions and have enough time for a robust debate. First up is going to be speaking is Dr. Muibu. She has carried out extensive research in Somalia and will be looking at issues of transnational crime in Eastern Africa. Brigadier General Howard was the commander of the 1st Special Forces Group, and he is going to be talking about organized crime. And finally, our last speaker, Brigadier General Dematris, he wanted me to mention he's been in a law enforcement game for a long time, but he's also ran 3 Ironmen. He really wanted me to make that point clear. So our first speaker is going to be
Thank you all for having me here today. Now, when we talk about organized crime, as many of you may already be aware, a useful tool for any discussion about organized crime in Africa is the ENACT Organized Crime Index for Africa. It provides useful insights into the criminal markets, the criminal actors, as well as the state of resilience within Africa over the past 5 years. Now, when you look to the screen, it captures 15 criminal markets, as well as 5 criminal actors. When you look to the other side of the screen, you can see that the ENACT Index also examines the state's ability to not only withstand, but also disrupt organized criminal activities as a whole. And they look at it through multiple different political, economic resilience, correspond very neatly to the development, security, and governance factors that generally lie as the drivers of organized crime across Africa. Now, when we're thinking about organized crime, its implications, and why is it relevant for African land forces, we must first recognize that a correlation exists between conflict and organized crime. As this map from ENACT demonstrates, that there is a geography has influenced and continues to sustain criminality patterns on the continent and vice versa. So whether we're talking about the Sahel, Central Africa, North Africa, Mozambique, or Eastern Africa, This correlation between conflict and criminality continues to exist, and has important reason is that organized crime finances the armed groups that you all are trying to fight. The second reason we should care is that organized crime affects the activities on the ground where forces are deployed, often by making those conditions more dangerous, for instance, with the flow of illicit arms. And the third reason why you need to care as land forces about organized crime is to understand that understand how to be able to address those threats. And be able to address those threats pretty much demonstrates the need for land forces to better coordinate and collaborate with multiple different security actors, different government actors, and different civil society actors. Now, when we think about criminality patterns across the entire continent over the past 5 years, what becomes clear is that criminality has increased over time. And generally, when we talk about those 15 criminal markets that I highlighted earlier on in the presentation, for this presentation is those criminal markets that are operating or functioning in areas that are experiencing protracted conflict. So these are the criminal markets that fund the groups that we're trying to fight and that impact the conflict locations that we're trying to operate in, making them more dangerous. The first I want to tackle is human trafficking and human smuggling. We see that there's been a general increase in human trafficking and smuggling across the continent. And generally, this has been concentrated mainly in Eastern Africa, where we see the highest scores of human trafficking and smuggling and at both the continental level and as well as the global level. A second area where we're seeing a growth in human smuggling is in Northern Africa over recent periods of time. A second factor or market that I want to highlight is arms trafficking. This is highlighted as the third most pervasive criminal market on the continent that has seen a steady increase since 2019. And the increase in arms trafficking is likely due to the flow of illicit arms from regions that have experienced long-term conflict and instability, particularly Eastern Africa and Central Africa. Another factor worth mentioning is environmental crimes. Now, environmental crimes include everything from the trade in endangered species, to the poaching of animals, to non-renewable resource crimes like illicit mining. And this upward trajectory that we see in environmental crimes across the continent has been a big concern in recent periods. Africa today is home to some of the highest scoring countries for non-renewable resource crimes, including areas such as Libya, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Central African Republic. It's also important to note that environmental crimes that are occurring in one theater also have implications for other theaters of conflict. A useful example of this is that trafficking networks that were linked to Tanzania as well as the Democratic Republic of Congo had links to the Al-Shabaab violent extremist group operating out of northern Mozambique, who was estimated to have made $2 million a month from illegal logging in 2019. Another factor worth noting is drug trafficking. And so the trade in different types of drugs, everything from cannabis to synthetic drug trade to methamphetamine trade, cocaine trade, as well as heroin trade, has seen links from everywhere from Northern Africa, Western Africa, and Eastern and Southern Africa. Lastly, the last market I want to talk about that is very prevalent and present in areas that are experiencing protracted conflict is extortion and protection racketeering. Now, when we look at the averages across the entire continent for extortion and protection racketeering, we see that this has had the least influence. But when we disaggregate the data and look at it at a country-to-country level, what becomes very clear is that for certain countries, particularly Somalia and Libya, these countries have the highest, include also violent extremist groups such as Al-Shabaab in Somalia. So what can we do about this? So for countering transnational organized crime efforts to be sustainable, We need to help to address the security, development, and governance factors that lie at the root of why transnational organized crime networks survive and even thrive. The 12 resilience factors that ENACT Index captures corresponds to these three drivers. And as we examine the trends of 2001 and 2003, but as the ENACT Index demonstrates, the gap between criminality and resilience is widening in Africa. So this suggests that despite improvements since 2000, recognizing that security, governance, and development factors drive and sustain organized crime, for the remainder of this presentation, I want to discuss some existing case studies where multi-sectoral, whole-of-government efforts are underway to counter organized crime. These efforts include land forces as one among a number of actors needed to counter these threats. I will not be exhaustive or too detailed, and certainly the examples I will highlight are not perfect and have shortcomings. But in the interest of moving the conversation beyond expanding understanding of threats and towards catalyzing realistic solutions, or at least generating some conversation around solutions, I want to highlight some of the efforts that are ongoing and that may move us closer towards this goal. The first example I want to give is cattle rustling in the Karamoja cluster that covers Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, and Ethiopia. This region economies and a culture of cattle rustling. And there's been various different efforts been undertaken to be able to counter these threats. Everything from traditional peace structures, to military-led disarmament and curfews, cordons and patrols, criminalization, arms embargoes, as well as developmental measures. But all of these approaches have not necessarily been able to strategically shift the trajectory of conflict in the region, largely because they have been poorly coordinated. And this opportunity comes in the form of the Mifugo Protocol. The protocol stipulates procedures for prosecuting cross-border cattle rustlers. It goes so far as to cover the entire value chain of activities, including the flow of illicit arms. The protocol now enables a unified approach that facilitates prosecutions and more consistent sentences than those provided by each of the other countries' national laws. So if we ratify this protocol, it will enable security forces in each of the 4 countries to share information about cattle rustlers, quickly get authorization for cross-border pursuits, approach investigations from a transnational organized crime perspective that would also cover related offenses such as illicit arm flows. The second example I want to give is about illicit activities and their connection with violent extremist groups in Benin. The terrorist attacks linked to groups such as JNIM and the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara in the northern regions of Benin have been on the rise since 2019. And studies conducted by organizations such as the Institute for Security Studies have revealed that these groups benefit from illicit activities that have existed in the region well before terrorist actors began gaining ground in those territories. And these illicit markets include fuel smuggling, drug trafficking, illegal hunting, illegal gold mining, and ammunition and arms trafficking. But where we do see an opportunity is highlighted in 2011, and the agency spearheaded a multi-sectoral effort to build public trust in government and foster the citizens' sense of belonging in the nation. And some of the measures that they have taken and put in place include placing defense and security forces in border zones to develop, providing civil legal assistance to members of the border communities, among a number of other development functions. Not perfect, at least the final one, is looking at environmental crimes in the Congo Basin. And here is where we have various armed groups and criminal groups that benefit from everything from illegal logging to poaching and illicit mining. Now, the transnational nature of these crimes, which involved cross-border criminal syndicates, underscores a need for strengthened regional collaboration among security sector and criminal justice actors, among a number of other civil society actors that exist across the borders of the 6 countries that make up the basin. Now, I want to highlight, and this is where you can see highlighted in green, is that they are environmental crimes. However, though there exists a plethora of regional and at times continental institutions involved in implementing cross-border coordinated responses, they do not fully overlap. But I want to highlight a few. One is agriculture and rural development. There's also the Central African Police Chiefs Coordination Organization, the Central African Forest Commission, as well as the Lusaka Agreement Task Force. Now, examples of activities taken is that taken by CAPCO. And what you see is that this Central African Police Chiefs Cooperation Organization had set forth to be able to create these mixed brigades that would include gendarmes, as cross-border trafficking. And this is just one of the examples that have been undertaken. Now, to conclude, the examples that I've given are, of course, not perfect, but they are at least efforts being undertaken to move, and the gap between resilience and criminality is widening. The second point to take away is that transnational organized crime, by funding the groups that we're fighting and making the theaters more dangerous. And lastly, there's a need for more coordinated, multi-state.
Can we turn? How are we doing today? Back. What does RET mean there after BG? What does it mean? Retired? Are you sure? States government, AFRICOM, or CTAF. That's important to note, because if the newspapers say something that Brigadier General Howard said, for having me here, I've known General Wassman since he was a young captain. He doesn't look a day older now than he did then. I think he invited me because I actually have pictures of him as a wild and crazy captain, so we'll see. You're a 3-day class in 8 minutes. You are fortunate in that there's no exam. All right, so here we go. Criminals fund terrorists. So I'm going to talk about the nexus between criminal activity, criminal cartels, criminal traffickers, and terrorists, and that's the focus of my presentation. This is my agenda. Still interaction between criminal cartels, criminal traffickers, and terrorists. That's my whole focus. How are you today, General? Pretty good? Good. So, what are the similarities between organized crime and terrorist organizations? They're both illegal. They use the same methods and tactics. Both have the same goals, some of the same goals: violence, fear, and corruption. And some, like Al-Qaeda and ISIL, the Chechen criminal cartel, have global reach. Global reach. The similarities between criminal traffickers and terrorist organizations: operate as networks, operate in denied. Both often use similar means to communicate. They exploit modern communication systems. Minds, what? They think they're altruistic. They think they're doing something positive for society. What are criminals? Use violence against police and other terrorist groups, competition. Terrorists use violence against unarmed civilians. That's the proper definition. Other definitions, well, as I said, the difference is motive. Either police. They are not alliances. They are not alliances. Drug trafficking is an important source of income for both groups. Drug trafficking now is the major income for both armed groups and terrorist organizations. They learn people they don't want to compete with. Government, soldiers, police. Terrorists have learned from criminal organizations. On the left, you see Al-Qaeda's organization before 9/11, After 9/11, they learned to adopt non-centralized, did a very good job of this, I won't belabor it. Drugs, weapons, humans, commodities, cigarettes, and gold are the most trafficked items in Africa. If you've all seen the movie Blood Diamond, you know this is a historical fact about the diamond trade financing terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda in particular. Hezbollah, big in the gold trade, still today, and the diamond trade. Present-day case study, just recently, 2 Lebanese were arrested in the United States. All this product cars going to Africa for sale, left 2021 down below. As most of you here know, Lake Chad, when it was a large lake, provided employment for, is a hotbed for criminal and terrorist activity because it is the way that people can make a living. Surviving with our Italian friends because they knew that the weapons in Libya, once Gaddafi fell, would understand the second and third order effects of our actions. So the nexus, criminal activity and terrorism in Africa is not through major criminal organizations, smaller groups presently. Mexican cartels have made inroads into Africa, particularly in Guinea-Bissau, which some people feel is really a criminal state. They take cocaine from South Africa and then take the old salt routes up north into Europe. So this is the one I'm watching. I said that cartels that dominate our drug industry, prostitution industry, haven't really taken grip in Africa. But this is one that I'm watching, the black axe. See the axe and the chain? The chain is tax fraud, anything that has to do with technology, much different than what I have been explaining previously. So what to do? Well, one thing is to do is, like our previous speaker said, oriented. My suggestion is that they take on a secure. I've worked in this is my 78th trip to your continent, and military and gendarmerie don't exactly talk together, nor do they talk to the other agencies, the other ministries. Coordination in your country is more afraid of security services than they are of Boko Haram problem. I just did a program in Ghana, where's someone from Ghana, here a year and a half ago on civil military operations, trained civil military operators. Finally, what to do? For security services, it's much easier to penetrate a criminal cell than it is a terrorist cell. But by penetrating a criminal cell that does business with terrorists, you can often get to the terrorist organization. It's a way in. Thank you very much. I think I went 9 minutes instead of 8. General Wassman, thank you again for inviting me. I had a great time. For a 77-year-old guy, I can still move. Did I do okay?
Oh, it was fantastic. You did a great job.
We could talk for hours for this. Can I have the remote?
Just for you.
Thank you so much, sir. Good afternoon. Salam alaikum. Bonjour. The elephant. The cops. Law enforcement. There is a need everywhere in each nation to feel a gap, which if it gets unfilled, will be filled by organized crime. Security gap or policing gap. TOC is the acronym for Transnational Organized Crime. It's transnational by nature, by definition. However, its effects are felt locally. On the other way around, we should address TOC locally at the root causes, to find the root causes, to disrupt globally organized crime. So today, being the cop, the elephant in the room, I would like to bring the military in the police dimension. Usually, in the NATO environment, I have a background in NATO. I was used to say, we bring the police dimension into the military environment. Today is the other way around. It will be crucial to understand together what we can do together. Interagency, interstate cooperation. If crime cross borders, so must law enforcement. Fighting against transnational organized crime is a struggle that knows no border. My stopwatch didn't start. I will take you somewhere else from Africa. Do you know this bloke? I trust my colleague Justin from the UK knows him. This is Mr. Sir Pedi Asdown, former special envoy of the United Nations in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we are talking about 1995. I was just 25 at that time. But it says something which was crucial. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, criminals pose the greatest, the most serious threat to stability, national priority. But let's go further east, Afghanistan. The international community praised the great success of the elections. Oh, no bombs blew off at the polls. Great success. Without mentioning that the poor Afghan people who went to the polls got stopped 200 meters from the polls by the Taliban. They checked the hands because unfortunately they couldn't write, and so they were illiterate. They checked the thumbs with the ink because they expressed their vote with the ink, and they had their hands chopped by the Taliban. Was it an exercise of democracy? I think no. And what about the rule of law then? Sir Mike Jackson, the first commanding general in Kosovo, so we go back west. 1999, confrontation with the Russians, some issues, but there was still a big issue. After Timor-Leste, there was the Carabinieri, my force, a police force with military status and organization expressing civil law enforcement capability, as the Gendarmerie. So la même chose. Anyway, he said that we are talking about just soldiers with the mindset of cops. Simple like that. They are fully interoperable. Daisy spoke about interoperability with the military. We have the same TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, and we use the same weaponry. So we can work together, hands in hands. Something else, going back to Afghanistan. Hosna Jalil, she was the first female in the government, in the Afghan government. She was 29 when she was nominated Deputy Minister for Interior. I had the opportunity to work with her, and she focused on the crime-related death toll in Afghanistan. It was 150/200% higher than the terrorist-related death. But the international community and the Afghan government focused on the so-called counterinsurgency or terrorism operations with a light footprint approach on law enforcement. And we ended up with the police supporting the military in counterinsurgency operations and dedicated Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, a United States auditing body of the Congress. I happened to cooperate with them on a report, Policing in Conflict, and the findings are a little bit scary. So, but wait a moment. The United Nations estimates that to deploy a mission, a police assistance mission, it takes 9 to 12 months. We have been busy with Haiti. You heard about it. The Security Council resolution dates the 2nd of October 2023, first 4 minutes when passed by. And we do not have the draft of the CONOPS yet. Rand Corporation, this is more scary. After the Second World War, societies recovering from war relapsed into war, most of them. Half of them, 50% of them, within 5 years. 1/5 within 1 year. Afghanistan, 9 days. Why? Lots of people wrote about it, but what about the rule of law? Cops, courts, and correction. The only definition about this gap, the policing gap, is in NATO. So I'm not bragging about NATO, I'm just saying that NATO understood the importance of policing in destabilized environments, so not only peacekeeping operations, destabilized environment. It's a gap that you can see from 2 different perspectives, capacity and capabilities, lack of capacity and capability, the dot line, and the real needs of the local population, which General Russell Howard said, somebody else will do it. The terrorists of organized crime. It happens everywhere, also in Fortress Europe, as somebody mentioned, and in my own country. I can give you plenty of examples. How the United Nations, 15 November 2000, the United Nations Transnational Organized Crime Convention. However, we don't have a definition of transnational organized crime. We know that a serious crime, however, is a crime which can be punished with a penalty of at least 4 years imprisonment. And then, as you see, there are criteria to establish. They want to do at least one serious crime, apart from petty crimes maybe, but usually they are very serious, heinous crime, I would say. And then they want a profit, material or financial. So we don't have a definition, but look at it. How many possible understanding of talk? Talk exploits porous borders. Everywhere there is a seam, they will sneak in. Terrorism as well. They exploit also regulatory gaps between countries. So neighboring countries must cooperate. Otherwise, they will be, the criminals will be in a safe haven. This fosters impunity, but this jeopardizes, undermines the legitimacy of your institutions. So can we afford that human rights are infringed every now and then? Can we afford that human security is underestimated by our institution? Can we afford to fail in the people committing any kind of violence and fuel corruption? Yesterday, I heard an awful lot of colleagues talking about corruption. But what can we do to better our countries? When I wake up, JFK will say, well, think about what you can do for your country, not about what your country can do for challenge. But to counter talk, we must have a multifaceted approach. Triathlon helps. And then, what about scarcity of police on the borders? Yesterday I heard a colleague talking about scarcity of police on the borders. And when you do not have enough police, you need to support them in controlling the borders. And your borders are far different from mine. I have sea and mountains in Italy. You have sometimes plain. That's it. It's far more difficult. You need drones, you need any kind of equipment to control, but also patrol. So let's see what is the perspective of the United Nations on transnational organized crime. It's a peace spoiler, it's a given, we know, because they fuel corruption. They are good also at exploiting an overlap between war and crime. Sometimes it's very difficult to understand it. Is it a criminal act or is it an act of war? Does it fall within the Geneva Convention or not? Or can we take these people before the prosecution? Do I have the legal framework to do it? And then every time there is a void, we spoke about a void, a gap. Every time somebody will exploit it. Think about also natural resources. Daisy, you spoke about it. Logging, poaching, illicit mining. And what about trafficking in waste? Pollution. Yesterday we spoke about environmental protection. So the United Nations is taking a keen eye on this, and for years has been working on developing the capacities of the recipients of the country. Through several projects, the Transnational Threat Project, you can see in the slide, the West Coast Africa Initiative, they are working on intelligence, on also building the capacity to fight violent extremism, organized crime, talk, I will say, and corruption. We must build the integrity of our institution. And then the cooperation with the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, and Interpol, which are the most important police international organizations that deal with the subject matter. So we cannot ignore talk. Where is the problem? The United Nations systems understand the importance of talk. What about member states? Do they turn a blind eye, as it happened in Afghanistan, where the international community didn't give a strong mandate? It's only 3 missions mandate which speak about organized crime talk in ONU, within the United Nations. Mali be a little bit more courageous to provide the United Nations with this more robust mandate. So, which are the key strategies to fight talk? This comes from my experience. I've been in the law enforcement industry since ever. So, there's no enemy. Who is the enemy? Let's exploit also undercover operation. It's difficult to infiltrate terrorism, but you can still use an awful lot of devices to listen what they do. For sure, it's far easier to infiltrate organized crime, because you do not have to convert possibly on an orthodox, on extremist vision of your religion. But crucial is community-oriented policing. The cop on the beat. We must talk to the population. Take out the sunglasses and talking to people, to the kids in the villages, to the elders. We must establish a contact with them, intelligence-led policing operation, joint operation with the other countries, with the other police forces. We do need a legal framework, but we do need also to be very aggressive with the money. We must be proactive. We must hit the financial heart of the organized crime criminal organization. If we fail to do so, they will flourish. If we cut the ties with money, they will do nothing. This comes from our experience, from my experience in Italy. The 2 phases that they are coming out are the phases of 2 prosecutors killed by mafia with roadside bombs. Follow the money, and you will disrupt organized crime. Technology, let's have the hedge, and we'll win also on this battlefield. And lastly, interagency cooperation. Judge Falcone Borsellino, I move to tears every time I see them. I was a lieutenant when they died. We are closing to an end. Interagency cooperation is crucial. It fosters info sharing, but also allows law enforcement to get more power. Think about the custody chain when we retrieve important pieces of evidence. Or think also about law enforcement intelligence. So don't think only about the green intelligence, but there is also a blue approach on the facts. And the commander on the ground needs both flow of information, because the police carry out investigation, but gathers also information and develop intelligence. Lastly, this improves cooperation and complementarity. Last slide. We need a paradigm shift. We cannot kill at will. One must not only neutralize our opponents, adversaries, non-enemies, because we must support the rule of law to minimize collateral damage. We must arrest people rather than killing them on the spot or capturing them, because we need to bring them before justice. And we must consolidate our battlefield gains. Also, the military support some very heavy organized crime operations. So we must not just win the battle and then retrieve. We must consolidate these gains. If we prosecute criminals rather than neutralizing them, we will for sure win the battle of narratives. We must, in this way, foster legitimacy of the institutions and resilience of the society. There is the last picture for you, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, my apologies. Do you know the Muppet in the center? It's Pinocchio. Everybody knows Pinocchio, the Muppet, the wooden Muppet. In a very large island in Italy, Sardinia, beautiful but very wild, talking about not organized crime, but criminality, the Carabinieri are called the Justice. the epitome of justice. But we are cops. We are not the courts. So, this is the aim of any kind of, as Professor Howard said, the most hated institution in Afghanistan, this is the Seagal report, was police, not the Taliban. I do thank you for your attention, pending your questions. I didn't speak about my center.
Perfect. Those were three fantastic presentations on organized crime. Some of the conclusions that I took away from the talk with Dr. Muibuz is that criminality is on the rise in the continent. And she used case studies from East Africa and around the Sahel to prove that point. And the gap between resilience and criminality in her case studies is seen to be widening. To combat effects of the conditions in the conflict locations where land forces are present, funding groups, we are fighting and making the theaters more dangerous, that we have to have different approaches to deal with this criminality and rise of it. Find stakeholders, whole government group approaches at the national and regional level. And this was something all three panelists focused on. Brigadier General's talk on organized crime also reached some of those similar conclusions. There needs to be more interministerial coordination. Regional security isn't just economic cooperation. There needs to be more in-depth and detailed relationships. Civil-military cooperation makes the citizens of the regions trust the security services more than criminals and terrorist organizations that are working there effectively. Now, our final presentation looked at how can we help the police services? How can we help engage them? What agency cooperation? That organized crime is a link in a way into terrorism. If we put the resources within trying to locate organized crime, combating it, we are going to be able to moving forward in a unified front, working together, interagencies. Will this be able to make a difference? Now, I'm going to open it up to everyone to ask questions. I'm going to take a few questions at a time so that the panelists could think about their answers, and then up to questions. Yep.
Merci de m'avoir donné la parole. On a parlé de termes différents, terrorisme et acte criminel. La question se pose. J'étais très content quand le général Ward a dit quelle est la solution de nous, les forces terrestres, tout à l'heure. Entrer dans le problème, c'est la définition. Chaque pays, chaque nation a des définitions différentes sur le terme terroriste et acte criminel. Par exemple, à Madagascar, quand j'étais sorti de l'école de l'officier, sous l'intrant en 1991, j'ai commencé à lutter contre ces actes criminels avant. En 1991, Madagascar ne connaît même pas le terme terrorisme. Au fur et à mesure, les organisations criminelles, je suis désigné comme commandant d'opération contre les vols de bœufs à Madagascar. C'est un cas particulier de Madagascar. Le vol de bœufs à Madagascar, avant, c'est us et coutume. Parce que dans la partie sud, quand tu ne voles pas, quand les hommes ne volent pas de bœufs, quand les hommes ne sont pas prisonniers, ils n'ont pas la chance d'avoir une femme pour épouser. Mais depuis quelques années, le vol de bœufs devient des actes criminels. Parce qu'ils ne volent plus des bœufs, mais ils terrorisent. C'est un acte criminel ou acte de terrorisme. Parce que le verbe terroriser, là, on se comprend. Donc, l'armée malgache, le gouvernement malgache de Madagascar a mis un système d'interaction entre les trois forces existantes à Madagascar, dont l'armée malgache, dont je faisais partie, la police nationale et la gendarmerie nationale. C'est pour cela que je dis que la question ou la définition de terrorisme et actes criminels sont différents. Je vais terminer mon intervention de poser quelques questions aux 3 ou 2 panélistes. Est-ce que le terrorisme ou les actes criminels sont suffisants sans les ONG, organisations non gouvernementales, sans les sociétés civiles? Je pose cette question parce que quand j'ai fait mon stage maintien de la paix au Mali, première étape, rétablissement de l'ordre. Donc c'est une action en force. Ensuite, maintenir la stabilité. Et pour finir, c'est de consolider la paix. Mais souvent, quand les militaires, l'armée, les organisations, les ONG, les sociétés civiles disaient qu'il n'y a pas de droits de l'homme. Les militaires ne respectent pas les droits de l'homme. Mais quand les terroristes ou les groupes, ils ferment les yeux, ils ferment leur bouche. Excusez-moi.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll try to answer the
Je
question
parle
now.
en tant que citoyen et militaire. Merci beaucoup.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
الإسلامية الموريتانية. من المعلوم أن جهات غير حكومية وبالتالي تصعب تتبعها قانونيا ويصعب نفاذ القانون على الناشطين فيها، لكن من المعلوم أيضا أنها تحدث فقدت السيطرة على أراضيها، فانتهزت المنظمات الإرهابية الحوزة الترابية لهذه البلدان وصارت تمارس هذه الجرائم المنظمة، وإما لأسباب أخرى. فعلى كل حال أظن أن المجتمع الدولي يجب أن يكون له دور في مساعدة الدول على السيطرة على أراضيها والسيطرة على القضاء على أسباب هذه الظواهر، لأن هذه الظواهر موجودة نتيجة لأسباب، ويجب أن نبحث عن هذه الأسباب حتى نقضي على الظاهرة. فالمرض يجب أن يتم تشخيصه للقضاء على المرض، يجب القضاء على أسبابه. وأظن أن دور الأمم المتحدة والمجتمع الدولي يجب أن يتجاوز البروتوكولات والأنظمة القانونية ووجود مكتب في إقليم معين، يجب أن تكون هناك إجراءات عملية بالتنسيق مع الدول التي يحدث فيها هذه الجرائم أو تعبر أراضيها، حتى تتمكن هذه الدول من السيطرة، إحكام السيطرة على حوزتها الترابية ومراقبة حدودها. فما هو دور المجتمع الدولي في هذا الإطار تجاوزاً للبروتوكولات وغير ذلك؟ وشكراً.
Answer them now, and then we'll go on to further questions. Brigadier General Howard, would you like to answer the first question?
Yeah, and I'm going to go up here. In which I have to tell you is the longest question I've ever heard in doing this. I'll give you a short answer. If those cattle rustlers are using violence or threat of violence against the citizenry for political or religious purposes, it's terrorism. If they are doing it for profit, it's criminal activity. The definition here is quite clear. That's my answer to the question. Now, I think I've established a pretty good who is deaf, who can't hear. So what I'd ask everybody in the audience to do, if you are right-handed, take your hand and put it down like this. Everybody, do it. Do it. If you are left-handed, do the same thing with your left hand, please. Okay? This is not a test. You can do it. If you really feel strongly about something, use both hands. What you have just done is thanked this gentleman. What he's doing now is very, very complicated. Take it from one who knows what he's doing. It's almost impossible to translate immediately in sign language from everything he's heard here. So what I would really like all of you to do is take both hands and do this, please. What you have done is just applauded our translator here. Thank you very much.
No problem. Unfortunately, I've been getting the signal that our distinguished guest is now coming, so we will have to end this plenary. That said, the second question asked, these three panelists all have an answer for it, and they will come and find you and give you a specific answer. I'm sorry we have...
Dr. Jackson and the panel, thank you again for those thoughtful words. And I could see from the energy in the room, there are a lot of questions out there. The good news fit. So we will now prepare for the arrival of our VAP. I would ask that we just take a short break in place. Once again, I just ask that we take a brief pause in place. Thank you so much.
Just have a look at it. Thank you so much for joining us. We are coming to you live from Radisson Bloom Sotunya Resort, where we are witnessing the arrival of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zambia, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, who has come to officiate at the 12th session, or rather African Land Forces Summit being held here in Livingstone, like earlier mentioned. So the motorcade is just making its way into the entrance of Radisson Blue Hotel. So the President, Mr. Hichilema, will be welcomed by Zambia Army Commander Lieutenant General Dennis Tali Al-Wuzwi. So there comes the motorcade. So he is also expected to inspect a guard of honor mounted by the Zambia Army. So just a quick background at the 12th or 12th African Land Forces Summit. We have a delegation of over 500 participating. So there we see the Wasmond, who is the commanding general for the Southern European Task Force Africa. The President has taken stage at the saluting dais, awaiting the national anthem. Stand by.
Presidential salute! Present! Arms! Shoulder! Arms! The President of the Republic of Zambia and Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Force, Guard mounted by Army Headquarters Garrison, present and ready for inspection. Sir. Order! Arms!
So the President, here he comes, inspecting the guard of honor.
Presidential salute! Present! Arms! Shoulder! Arms! Order! Arms!
So here we go. That was the presidential salute and consequently the guard of honor, and the president now he's is taking a walk towards the venue. So His Excellency, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, has come to officiate at the 12th African Land Forces Summit here in Livingstone. In case you're joining us, I am Muyam Kumbuta. So the president taking some photos. So just a quick roundup of some countries that are present here. We have our neighboring countries, Zimbabwe, we have Malawi, we do have Angola, we do have the Kingdom of Eswatini, South Africa. Also, we do have the United Republic of Tanzania as part of participating countries here at the African Land Forces Summit. So thank you so much for joining us. We will continue with our live broadcast here in Livingstone. We'll see you shortly.